Sarah Torres wiped the sweat and grease from her palms, leaving a streak across her forehead. The hangar smelled of oil, scorched metal, and the faint tang of jet fuel, comforting to her, a scent that made her feel alive. She crouched beside the Apache attack helicopter, running her fingers along its rotor shaft, feeling the subtle vibrations of the machine as if it were a living creature. To everyone else, it was just another piece of military hardware, sleek and dangerous. To Sarah, it was a beast with a pulse she could hear if she listened closely. She had grown up dreaming of flying, but the Navy had assigned her to fix the aircraft, not to command them. "Mechanics don't fly," they said. "Stay in your lane." The words had stung every time, each utterance another reminder of the ceiling she'd been forced to accept. The pilots, the ones she trained alongside, the ones who nodded politely while she explained the intricacies of the Apache's engines, rarely saw beyond her overalls and wrench. Some called her lucky, some called her incompetent. A few outright mocked her behind closed doors. Sarah had learned long ago to smile, nod, and bury the fire inside her, but the fire never truly went out. Not when she listened to the hum of the engines, not when she felt the vibrations along the rotor shafts, not when she imagined herself in the cockpit, scanning the horizon, soaring over valleys and mountains with the wind whipping past her face. That morning was no different from countless others, and yet it was. The Apache's rotor blades were unusually stiff, resisting her attempts to spin them manually. She frowned, bending closer to inspect the hydraulic linkage. Something was off. Normally, this was routine work, tightening, lubricating, ensuring smooth motion. But today the rotor groaned in protest, a deep, metallic whine that didn't belong. The pilots had begun their pre-flight checks, laughing and joking among themselves, unaware of the danger lying in wait. Sarah's stomach tightened. Every instinct screamed at her that something wasn't right. "Hey, Torres, why don't you leave the flying to the professionals?" one of the younger pilots called, smirking as he adjusted his helmet. Sarah's jaw clenched, but she didn't respond. Words were cheap here. Action mattered. She returned to the helicopter, tracing wires and inspecting hydraulic circuits, every movement deliberate. Her hands, roughened from years of mechanical labor, were surprisingly deft, finding issues that a pilot with a cursory glance would never notice. The tension built around her, the air thick with static energy. Minutes later, the ground crew began shouting. "Warning! Warning! System failure detected." Alarms echoed through the hangar, a shrill, insistent reminder that something had gone terribly wrong. A pilot ran to the Apache, tapping controls frantically. The rotor shuddered violently, spinning unevenly, throwing sparks into the air. The crowd of onlookers froze. Everyone turned to Sarah, their faces a mixture of fear, disbelief, and begrudging respect. Without hesitation, Sarah climbed onto the side of the helicopter, grabbing the access panel. "It's a hydraulic bleed in the main rotor control," she shouted over the alarms. Some of the pilots stared, stunned. The very system that could cause catastrophic failure mid-flight was within her grasp. She knew the mechanism by heart, every piston, every valve, every pressure gauge. While they panicked, she acted. Hours earlier, she had been a mechanic, someone who followed orders, someone who cleaned parts and tightened screws. Now she was something more. Her hands moved almost automatically, adjusting valves, bleeding lines, monitoring pressure readings. Sweat dripped into her eyes as sparks flew from a misaligned hydraulic pump. The pilots around her shouted instructions she didn't need. She didn't wait for permission. She couldn't. Lives depended on the Apache functioning properly. And yet for a moment, her mind drifted back to her childhood, climbing trees, imagining herself as a pilot in a sky full of dragons, winds ripping through her hair. That feeling, the thrill of control, the exhilaration of daring, surged through her veins. She could almost taste it. Finally, with a deep breath, she reached the main rotor shaft and turned the valve just slightly, allowing hydraulic fluid to flow smoothly. The groan of the rotor faded to a steady, powerful hum. The helicopter vibrated under her touch, alive again, the alarm silenced. The pilots stared at her in stunned silence. Some wanted to cheer, others looked away, unable to process what they had witnessed. How did you know?" one asked, voice trembling. Sarah wiped her hands on a rag, smudging oil across her face. She didn't answer. Words weren't necessary. The helicopter was alive again, its pulse steady, ready to take flight. She had done what no one else in that hangar had been able to accomplish. And yet the whispers began almost immediately. Mechanic, lucky, she got lucky. They didn't understand. They had never felt the intimacy she shared with machines. The way her fingers could detect the subtlest irregularities. The way her mind could anticipate failures before they happened. But Sarah knew the truth. Luck had nothing to do with it. Skill, instinct, and years of intimate knowledge had carried her through. The pilots didn't see it yet, but one day they would. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but the fire inside her, the one they mocked and underestimated, was not so easily extinguished. As she stepped back from the Apache, Sarah felt the eyes of the hangar on her. Some skeptical, some curious, some admiring. The machine gleamed under the overhead lights, a living testament to her capabilities. For the first time, she allowed herself a small, private smile. This was the beginning of proving them wrong, of claiming what she had always dreamed of, and of showing the Navy that a mechanic could do more than just repair machines. And then, from the corner of the hangar, a voice crackled over the intercom. "Mechanic Tours, report to Admiral Jensen's office, immediately." Her heart skipped. Admiral Jensen, the admiral known for ruthlessness, for breaking careers as easily as molding them, for recognizing talent only when it threatened his own authority. Sarah's stomach twisted in anticipation. Why him? Why now? She squared her shoulders, wiped the sweat from her brow, and walked toward the door. Every step echoed in the cavernous hangar, every heartbeat a drum of suspense. The door loomed ahead like the threshold to an unknown battlefield, not of sky or storm, but of judgment and recognition. She didn't know what awaited her, only that her life was about to change. Outside, the sun broke through clouds in streaks of gold and silver, casting long shadows across the tarmac. The Apache waited, engines quiet, rotors still. And in that silence, Sarah realized something. The world might still see her as just a mechanic, but she felt something else entirely: power, purpose, and the promise of the sky. She pushed open the door. And with that, she stepped into the unknown. The corridor leading to Admiral Jensen's office felt narrower than usual, the harsh fluorescent lights casting long, distorted shadows along the walls. Every step Sarah took echoed in the silence, her boots pounding a rhythm that matched the rapid beat of her heart. Her hands, still streaked with oil and sweat from the Apache, felt unsteady, though she forced herself to breathe evenly. She had faced storms, engines on the brink of catastrophe, and unrelenting skepticism from pilots, but this was different. This was the Admiral. One misstep here could end everything she had fought for. The door to his office opened before she could knock. Admiral Jensen stood rigid, the corners of his mouth pressed into a firm line, eyes sharp and unyielding. Around him, maps of operations, topographical charts, and screens flickering with simulation data created a landscape of military precision and authority. Jensen motioned toward the simulator at the center of the room. "Mechanic Tours, let's see what you're capable of. Take her up." Her pulse quickened. "Her?" she asked, nodding toward the virtual Apache. Jensen said nothing, only gestured with a single hand. The simulator's cockpit welcomed her, sensors and controls illuminated with an almost eerie glow. The hum of the virtual engines vibrated through the floor, a sound that made the hairs on the back of her neck rise. She slid into the seat, fastening the harness with practiced precision, feeling the familiar embrace of controls that mirrored the real machine she had just saved from certain failure. Outside the simulation, Jensen's eyes never left her. The room seemed to shrink, pressure building with each passing second. Sarah adjusted the throttle, tested the rotors, all systems green, but this wasn't a normal flight. The simulator was programmed for the impossible: combat conditions, heavy enemy fire, civilians in jeopardy, collapsing structures, and ever-changing weather patterns designed to test even the most experienced pilots. She swallowed and exhaled slowly. The virtual city spread beneath her, a sprawling nightmare of chaos. Smoke curled from buildings struck by simulated missiles, fires blazing, streets crisscrossed with desperate civilians. Alarms blared and warnings flashed across her dashboard. The simulated Apache vibrated violently as if protesting the chaos around it. In that moment, every memory of working on the real helicopters, the feel of the rotor, the subtle feedback from the instruments, surged to the forefront of her mind. Her hands moved instinctively. "Remember," Jensen's voice cut through the comms, cold and precise, "this is a test of instinct, not just knowledge. Show me what you've got." Sarah adjusted the throttle, banking sharply to avoid a simulated missile that streaked across the skyline. Her stomach lurched as the craft twisted violently, but her fingers were calm, precise. She remembered the countless hours in the hangar, listening to engines, memorizing every gauge, every valve, every nuance. Those hours were coming together now in a symphony of skill and instinct. Below, civilians scrambled, trapped between virtual explosions and collapsing structures. Sarah had to navigate corridors so narrow it felt impossible. Every turn, every adjustment mattered. One miscalculation and the simulated disaster would be catastrophic. The hum of the Apache became a song, her senses sharpened to every vibration, every flicker on the HUD. She moved like a conductor guiding an orchestra, fluid, confident, unstoppable. Jensen leaned forward, scrutinizing every movement. He had seen hundreds of pilots falter, some panicking, some overcompensating, others frozen by fear. But Sarah moved with the precision of someone who understood the machine as an extension of herself, anticipating its reactions before they happened. He watched as she dove, twisted, and leveled with uncanny precision, dodging enemy fire and rescuing trapped civilians. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours as alarms shrieked and warnings flared. Her heart pounded, sweat dripped into her eyes, and her lungs burned. But she didn't stop. The simulator pushed her to the brink, to the very edge of what a pilot could endure mentally and physically. And yet she adapted, anticipated, corrected. Then came the final test. A simulated explosion rocked the city, debris scattered, and a critical system on the Apache failed. The virtual rotors shuddered violently. Sarah's pulse spiked. Every instinct screamed failure. But she remembered the hangar, the real helicopter that had shuddered violently in her hands just days before. She leaned forward, adjusting the emergency override, manually compensating for the failing hydraulics, her fingers moving faster than thought. The rotor stabilized. The Apache leveled. Civilians below were safe. Silence fell over the simulator. Sarah's chest heaved, sweat soaking her uniform. She exhaled, trying to steady her hands. Admiral Jensen's face betrayed nothing at first, an unreadable mask of authority. But then, very slowly, a trace of admiration flickered across his eyes. "You survived," he said, his voice low but intense. "Many would have failed, some would have panicked, some would have died trying." He leaned closer, the weight of his gaze heavy. "And you thrived." Sarah's lips pressed tight. She didn't allow herself relief, not yet. The simulator still hummed, a digital echo of the chaos she had mastered. She knew this was only the beginning. But something in Jensen's eyes told her that he saw her differently now, not as just a mechanic, but as someone with real potential. Outside the simulator, the room seemed impossibly quiet. The other pilots, some of whom had followed the session via monitors, shifted uncomfortably. Some scowled, some whispered. None had dared attempt what she had just accomplished. The tension was palpable. Would Jensen recognize her fully? Or was this just a test, another step in a long chain of scrutiny she had yet to endure? Finally, Jensen spoke again, more quietly. "Mechanic tours. I've seen many pilots come through here. Few demonstrate instincts like yours. You may have a future I didn't anticipate." The words hit Sarah like a shockwave. Her stomach lurched, not from fear this time, but from a mix of relief, pride, and disbelief. For years she had been underestimated, dismissed, mocked. Yet here, in the heart of the Navy's most demanding environment, she had proven herself in a way no one else could. And yet the suspense lingered. The Admiral's praise was tempered as if he were testing her still. Could she truly transition from mechanic to pilot? Could she survive a real mission with lives, not simulations, at stake? The questions clawed at her mind as she left the simulator, the fluorescent lights of the office reflecting off her sweat-streaked face. She stepped into the hallway, every nerve alight. Outside, the tarmac gleamed under the early morning sun, and the real Apache waited, rotors still, engines quiet. But she knew what was coming. Soon, it wouldn't be simulations. Soon, she would have to prove herself in the sky, with real threats, real danger, and real lives depending on her. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt the weight of possibility. The path ahead was terrifying. The stakes were higher than anything she had ever faced. And yet, the fire inside her, the drive that had carried her through every insult, every doubt, every long night in the hangar, burned brighter than ever. The door to the simulator closed behind her with a soft thud. She clenched her fists, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, "I can do this." Above, the sky seemed to shimmer, as if acknowledging her promise. The first real test was coming, and when it did, Sarah knew she would be ready, whether anyone believed it or not. The corridor ahead stretched like a gauntlet into the unknown, and she walked toward it with steady determination. Her boots echoed, a rhythm of courage. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "This is only the beginning." And then came the call that would push her to the ultimate test. The roar of the Apache's engines filled the morning air, vibrating through Sarah Torr's chest like a living heartbeat. Sunlight glinted off the blades as they sliced through the sky, each rotation a testament to precision and power. She sat in the cockpit, hands steady on the controls, heart hammering not from fear but from the intoxicating thrill of command. For years she had been a mechanic, relegated to the shadows of pilots who never saw her worth. Now, strapped into the seat she had long dreamed of occupying, she was finally living that dream. And yet, the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. The mission was a routine training exercise, or so it was labeled. The reality, however, was far from ordinary. The Navy had prepared a complex flight pattern designed to simulate hostile territory, rapidly changing wind currents, sudden obstacles, emergency evasive maneuvers. It was meant to test even the most seasoned pilots. And now, it was Sarah's turn. She could feel the tension radiating from the crew behind her, all eyes fixed on the cockpit's canopy as if expecting disaster. Some doubted her ability to survive the test. Others, secretly, wondered if she could exceed all expectations. The first challenge appeared sooner than expected. A sudden wind shear struck from the port side, jarring the Apache violently. The rotors groaned, every system screaming under the pressure. Instinctively, Sarah countered, twisting the throttle, adjusting the cyclic, and leveling the aircraft. The instruments flickered, warnings of instability, but her hands didn't waver. She had memorized the Apache's every response in simulations and in the hangar, and now, in the sky, it was as if the helicopter and she were one entity. A rhythm pulsed between them, subtle and precise, guiding her through chaos. The clouds above thickened, low-hanging and dark, swallowing the sun and casting eerie shadows across the terrain below. Lightning forked in the distance, illuminating valleys and cliffs. Visibility dropped suddenly, and Sarah felt a thrill of fear that surged through her like electricity. Every decision now carried consequences far beyond herself. She recalled her childhood, climbing trees and pretending to fly, imagining herself soaring above mountains and rivers. Back then, the only stakes were scraped knees and bruised elbows. Now, the stakes were real, the danger palpable, and every instinct mattered. Ahead, a series of obstacles appeared, simulated enemy fire, collapsing buildings, and civilian vehicles trapped in narrow streets. Sarah had to navigate through impossible corridors, banking sharply, climbing steeply, and diving suddenly, each maneuver calculated down to the millisecond. She could hear the murmurs of the observers on the radio, disbelief threading their words. "She's insane," one muttered. "How is she doing that?" Another whispered, "I've been flying for 20 years and I've never seen." But their words cut off, lost in the roar of the engines and the whine of the rotors. Minutes stretched like hours as Sarah executed a series of maneuvers that would have sent less experienced pilots into panic. The Apache twisted through narrow mountain passes, hovered over ravines, and dodged simulated enemy missiles that screamed past, each one narrowly missing its mark. Her hands moved with precision born from years of intimate knowledge of every bolt, every gauge, every subtle vibration of the aircraft. Her training as a mechanic, the hours spent memorizing the aircraft's behavior, allowed her to anticipate every problem before it became a threat. But then came the unexpected. A rotor system warning flashed bright red on the display. Hydraulic pressure had dropped suddenly, a test of her ability to recover from sudden failure. The simulator, or the real machine, she didn't know which anymore, shuddered violently under her hands. Panic flickered at the edge of her mind, a shadow she refused to entertain. She took a deep breath, recalling every repair she had ever performed, every emergency scenario she had studied. Her fingers flew across the controls, adjusting valves and compensating for the failing system, coaxing the Apache back into stability. The rotors leveled, and the warning subsided. Sarah exhaled sharply, sweat stinging her eyes. Around her, the sky was a living, roiling entity, clouds boiling and lightning slicing the heavens. The terrain below twisted and shifted, the simulation or reality pushing her to the absolute edge of control. She tightened her grip, calculating her next move. A convoy appeared in the valley below, trapped by debris and enemy fire. Civilians were simulated in peril, the exercise designed to test her decision-making under extreme stress. There was no time for hesitation. She had to act and act perfectly. Hovering above the valley, she deployed rescue equipment, lowering medics and supplies with surgical precision. The Apache trembled under the strain, but she held it steady, matching speed and altitude with delicate movements. The simulated enemy fire intensified, missiles streaking past in lethal arcs. Her pulse was a drum in her chest, her mind a razor-sharp focus. She had never felt more alive, more tested, more in command of her destiny. The world outside the canopy faded. There was only her and the machine, the sky and the danger, and the lives she could save. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed in a blur of maneuvers, precision flying, and split-second decisions. Sarah had become one with the Apache, the fusion of mechanic and pilot giving her an edge no one else possessed. Each successful maneuver, each life saved in the simulation, was a quiet victory, a testament to years of being doubted and overlooked. She had transformed the humiliation of being just a mechanic into power, skill, and undeniable competence. Finally, the exercise ended. The simulation froze, engines whirring down in virtual silence. Sarah's chest heaved, her uniform soaked with sweat, her hands raw from gripping the controls. The room around her seemed impossibly still. Observers leaned forward, some incredulous, others awestruck. Admiral Jensen remained silent for a moment longer, the weight of his gaze pressing down on her. Then he spoke, low and deliberate. "Mechanic tours, I've seen hundreds of pilots. Few react to stress like this. Few survive it, fewer still thrive." Sarah allowed herself a small, private smile, though her pulse had yet to slow. The fear and exhilaration still coursed through her veins, a reminder of what she was capable of, and what she could still achieve. She had faced the ultimate test of instinct and skill, and she had not just survived, she had dominated. But even as her body relaxed, a creeping tension remained. This was training, simulated danger. The real world would be far harsher, with lives actually on the line, enemies actually firing, and consequences far more severe. Could she perform at this level when it truly mattered? Could she navigate the chaos of war without the safety net of a simulation? The questions gnawed at her, sharpening the edge of anticipation. Admiral Jensen leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, carrying both warning and admiration. "Today, you proved something no one else could. Tomorrow, we'll see if the sky agrees." Sarah swallowed hard, heart hammering. She had crossed a threshold today, moved from mechanic to pilot in practice, if not yet in title. But tomorrow, the real test, was looming, and she knew the storm above wasn't just in the clouds. It was coming for her, and she would have to meet it head-on. The helicopter descended, engines throttling down to idle. Sarah removed her helmet, brushing damp hair from her face, and looked out across the tarmac. The sun glinted off the blades, a reminder of both triumph and challenge. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that refused to leave her body. Every fiber of her being was alive, aware, alert. She had flown through storms, dodged death, and faced the impossible. And yet the real skis, the real challenges, were still waiting. Her phone buzzed. A text from the flight command, mission assignment confirmed. Depart at 600, coordinates encrypted. Sarah's stomach tightened. The simulations had prepared her, yes, but this was real. Lives depended on her. Her skills, instincts, and courage would be tested beyond anything she had ever imagined. The moment of reckoning had arrived. She looked at the Apache one last time, touching the fuselage as if seeking reassurance from the machine itself. It hummed softly beneath her fingers, steady and waiting. She drew a deep breath, eyes narrowing with determination. Tomorrow she would face the sky, and the sky would test her like never before. And somewhere in the depths of her mind, a single thought pulsed, fierce and unyielding. I am ready. Sarah Torres stepped off the Apache with her heart still pounding, adrenaline coursing through every vein. The hangar seemed unusually quiet, almost expectant, as if the walls themselves had witnessed her triumph. Yet, despite the fire she had ignited in the simulator, she knew the real test wasn't above the clouds. It was here, among people who still refused to see her for what she truly was. Her uniform clung to her from sweat, streaked with smudges of grime and hydraulic fluid, but she held her chin high, refusing to let the weight of skepticism crush her resolve. Word of her performance had traveled fast, carried by whispers and astonished murmurs. Some of the pilots who had doubted her now stared with disbelief, their expressions oscillating between grudging respect and irritation. She caught snippets of their conversations. No way she actually did it. I've flown for 20 years and I've never seen, but the admiration was tentative, fragile. It was almost as if her success threatened to unravel their carefully constructed hierarchy, shaking their pride to the core. And yet not everyone was impressed. A few pilots muttered under their breath, voices sharp with envy. Lucky, one said, arms crossed over his chest. A mechanic shouldn't even be in the same room as that cockpit. Another snorted. She's just a fluke. Wait until she hits a real mission. She'll fold under pressure. Sarah's stomach twisted, a mix of irritation and determination lighting a fire deep inside her. She had heard these words her entire career, dismissed as unworthy, underestimated, overlooked. They fueled her, sharpening her focus. The silence of the hangar was broken by the intercom. Mechanic Torres, report to Admiral Jensen immediately. Her pulse jumped. Again, the Admiral had already tested her limits once in the simulator. What could he possibly want now? Her boots echoed on the steel floor as she walked toward his office, each step measured, deliberate. The air felt heavy with anticipation. What awaited her behind that door could change everything or end it. Admiral Jensen's office was as imposing as ever. Maps, digital displays, and tactical projections filled the room. He didn't waste words. He gestured toward a monitor displaying the simulation from earlier. You've exceeded expectations, he said, voice calm but commanding. You performed maneuvers that most trained pilots would fail in real time. Your instincts are exceptional, but instincts alone won't suffice. Sarah nodded, trying to mask the thrill and tension coursing through her. Every word from Jensen carried weight. She had spent her life being overlooked, and now someone with real authority acknowledged her talent. But she knew better than to assume praise equaled safety. Recognition in the Navy came at a price, and admiration could quickly turn to scrutiny, or worse. You're not here to be admired, Jensen continued. You're here to be tested. Real missions don't have simulations. Real missions have lives on the line, and your decisions will be irreversible. Can you handle that? The weight of the question pressed against her chest, Yet Sarah didn't flinch. She had imagined this moment countless times, dreaming herself as a pilot, feeling the wind whip past her face, mastering the Apache in the chaos of flight. "Yes, sir," she said, voice steady. "I can handle it." Jensen studied her for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "We'll see." As Sarah left his office, a mixture of awe and scorn awaited her. Some pilots offered cautious nods, acknowledging her skill without fully admitting it. Others whispered, their voices sharp and cutting. "She'll never survive a real operation. Let's see her try in hostile territory." The scorn was palpable, but Sarah didn't let it break her. If anything, it reinforced her determination. Every insult, every doubt, every smirk she had endured over the years had led to this moment. Back at the hangar, she approached the Apache. Its blades reflected the morning sun, and the roar of its engines felt like a heartbeat in the still air. She ran her hands along the fuselage, feeling the familiar vibrations, the pulse of a machine she knew better than anyone. The pilots who mocked her lingered nearby, unable to tear their eyes away, yet unwilling to acknowledge her mastery. Their gazes were sharp, almost predatory, as if they were looking for a flaw, something to prove her unworthy. One of the senior pilots, Lieutenant Harris, stepped forward. "I don't know how you did it," he admitted reluctantly, tone edged with frustration. "That maneuver, it's impossible for someone without years of piloting experience." Sarah's lips pressed tight. She didn't respond. Words were unnecessary. The Apache, the storm, the simulator, her actions spoke louder than any argument. Still, the whispers persisted, slicing through the hangar air. Sarah felt the familiar sting of doubt cast by others. For years, she had been told she wasn't capable, that she belonged in the maintenance bay rather than the cockpit. Today, she had proven them wrong, but proving them wrong in theory was different from proving it in practice. Real missions awaited, and only time would confirm her skill beyond simulations. As she prepared the Apache for another test flight, her communicator buzzed. "Tors, Commander Mitchell wants a word," it said. She tightened her grip on the harness, heart skipping a beat. Commander Mitchell was known for being relentless, a man who could make or break careers with a single assessment. This was no casual conversation. Something about it carried tension, the kind that pressed against her chest and made her stomach twist. "Mechanic Tors," Mitchell said, voice clipped and formal. "Your performance today extraordinary, but you must understand the Navy has strict protocols. A mechanic flying a mission is unprecedented. There will be scrutiny, questions, and resistance." He paused, his eyes sharp. "Are you prepared for that?" Sarah met his gaze, unwavering. "I am," she said firmly. "I've spent my entire career preparing for this, sir. I'm ready for scrutiny, resistance, and missions alike." Mitchell studied her for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "Very well. We'll see if your instincts translate to reality. Remember this. You will be tested at every step, doubted at every turn, and your limits pushed beyond anything you've ever known. Do not fail." The words struck her like a hammer, but instead of fear, they ignited determination. Sarah's journey had been one of constant defiance, proving her worth in a world that consistently tried to dismiss her. Now, the stakes were higher, but the fire inside her burned brighter than ever. Later, as she walked past the hangar bay, she overheard a heated conversation among the pilots. "I can't believe they're letting her fly operational missions," one whispered. "She's just a mechanic. What if she fails?" Another added, voice dripping with sarcasm, "Yeah, let's see how instincts handle real combat." Sarah's stomach twisted with anger, but also with focus. Every doubter, every critic, every scornful glance sharpened her resolve. They could mock her, they could belittle her, but they could never touch the skills she had honed in the hangar, the instincts that now defined her, or the fire that refused to die. She reached the Apache, fingertips tracing the cool metal of the fuselage. She imagined the sky, the wind, the storm, and the missions that awaited her. This was no longer about proving others wrong. It was about proving herself right. Every maneuver she executed, every life she saved would be a testament not to luck, but to skill, courage, and relentless determination. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered, steady and unyielding, They don't know what I'm capable of. Yet. As she climbed into the cockpit for the next flight, the tension in the hangar hung like a storm cloud. Every pair of eyes followed her, some in awe, some in scorn, all waiting to see what she would do next. The Apache thrummed beneath her hands, alive and powerful, ready to carry her into challenges that would test the limits of skill, courage, and instinct. The engines roared to life, a sound both terrifying and exhilarating. Sarah Torres, once just a mechanic, now soared on the cusp of legend. The real missions and the real judgments were waiting. And as the helicopter lifted into the sky, the shadows of scorn lingered below, but they could not touch her. Not here, not now, not ever. The sky was hers, and it was ready to test her. Sarah Torres walked briskly across the tarmac, the roar of helicopters and jets echoing through the morning air. The sun glinted off the Apache's rotors, casting fleeting shadows on the concrete. Today wasn't a simulation. Today was real, or at least as close to real as the Navy could make it before she faced actual combat. Admiral Jensen had summoned her personally, and Sarah knew that every maneuver she executed today would be scrutinized, every decision weighed, and every instinct tested. She could feel the eyes of every pilot in the hangar, some filled with awe, some with doubt, all waiting to see if just a mechanic could survive this trial. Jensen didn't waste time with pleasantries. His office had been converted into a mobile operations hub, monitors displaying intricate mission maps, tactical overlays, and live drone feeds. He gestured toward the largest screen, showing a simulated urban combat zone, crumbling buildings, civilian populations trapped amidst the chaos, and hostile forces advancing rapidly. "This," Jensen said, voice calm but authoritative, "is your test, not a simulator, not a controlled environment. You will command this Apache through a scenario designed to push even our most experienced pilots to the edge. Civilian lives, strategic assets, and your own survival depend on it." Sarah's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. She had faced storms, alarms, and mechanical failures, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. This was the crucible. She climbed into the cockpit, adjusting her harness and checking instruments, every muscle coiled with anticipation. The Apache thrummed beneath her hands, alive, responsive, and unforgiving. She felt the familiar hum in her fingertips, a language she had spent years learning in the hangar, now speaking fluently in the language of the sky. "Commence exercise," Jensen commanded. The helicopter lifted off with a roar that reverberated through the tarmac and through her chest. The urban environment below unfolded like a war zone, streets choked with rubble, smoke curling from overturned vehicles, and civilians fleeing in terror. Enemy units advanced strategically, employing tactics meant to overwhelm and confuse. Every decision mattered. Hesitation would mean simulated death, but the pressure felt real enough to tighten her chest with adrenaline. The first challenge appeared almost immediately. An enemy sniper on a high rooftop locked onto her altitude, and a missile streaked through the air toward her Apache. Sarah's training kicked in. She banked sharply, tilted the rotors, and executed a sudden evasive maneuver that sent the missile harmlessly past. She felt the helicopter respond under her touch, a creature bending to her will, her instincts synchronized with its systems. She dove, twisted, and ascended, moving through the urban maze with precision and grace. Below, a convoy of civilians trapped between collapsing structures and advancing enemies required immediate attention. She hovered above, deploying medics and supplies, her movements deliberate, calculated yet fluid. Every action had a ripple effect. One wrong maneuver, and the simulated civilians would be casualties. Her hands flew across the controls, adjusting thrust, compensating for wind currents, and coordinating with drone feeds to anticipate enemy movements. Time slowed, each second stretched into eternity, the hum of the Apache and the chaos of the urban battlefield merging into a singular focus. A sudden explosion rocked the simulation, debris falling perilously close to the helicopter. Warning lights flashed red, hydraulic pressure dipped, threatening rotor stability. Sarah's heart leapt into her throat, but she didn't panic. She remembered the hangar, the countless hours of study, the intimate knowledge of every system in the Apache. Her fingers moved automatically, adjusting valves and compensating for the failing hydraulic system. The rotor stabilized. The Apache leveled. Crisis averted. Exceptional response. Jensen's voice came over the comms, tight with control yet tinged with approval. You anticipate problems before they occur. Few pilots demonstrate that level of instinct. Sarah allowed herself a brief exhale, but her mind remained razor-focused. The exercise was far from over. Enemy reinforcements were converging, and her next challenge would test her endurance, precision, and nerve to the extreme. The scenario escalated. Multiple enemy units attempted flanking maneuvers, approaching from unexpected angles. Sarah executed countermeasures while continuing to safeguard civilians and strategic assets. The Apache system screamed under the strain, every warning light a challenge, every vibration a reminder of the stakes. Her hands, though slick with sweat, were steady, each movement deliberate. The pilots observing her from the control room exchanged uneasy glances. Some muttered disbelief. She's performing maneuvers no one else could execute, one said quietly. Another scowled, as if the sheer impossibility of her skill threatened their own reputations. Minutes blurred into a relentless sequence of calculated maneuvers, tactical adjustments, and split-second decisions. Sarah hovered over crumbling bridges, banked between skyscrapers, and darted through narrow alleys with precision that seemed almost superhuman. Every instinct, every lesson from the hangar, every simulation she had endured culminated in this moment. The helicopter was an extension of her body, her mind, and her will. Then came the final challenge. A sudden blackout in one of the helicopter's critical systems, simulating a complete loss of navigation and communication. Panic flared in the observers, and Jensen leaned forward, scrutinizing her every move. Sarah's fingers danced across the emergency overrides, consulting instinct over instruments, trusting muscle memory over the faltering displays. The Apache groaned but responded, lifting just above the threshold of failure. She leveled the aircraft, stabilizing it with a combination of skill, intuition, and raw courage. The simulated civilians below were safe. The mission was complete. Silence fell over the operations hub. Sweat dripped from Sarah's brow, her uniform soaked, her heart pounding. Every observer held their breath. Jensen's eyes, sharp and penetrating, studied her with intensity. Then, for the first time, a faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Mechanic Tours," he said, voice low but carrying authority. "You have demonstrated what few pilots in this Navy ever will. Instinct, skill, decisiveness. You possess it all." Sarah allowed herself a small, private victory. Years of doubt, years of being underestimated had culminated in this recognition. Yet, even as admiration flickered across Jensen's stern face, tension remained. Real missions awaited with real consequences. Simulations had tested her, yes, but could she translate this extraordinary skill into life-and-death scenarios in hostile territory? That question gnawed at her, sharpening her focus rather than dulling it. Outside the operations hub, the other pilots murmured in disbelief. Some offered grudging nods of respect, others avoided her gaze, unable to reconcile the undeniable truth of her ability with their preconceptions. The scorn that had haunted her career lingered, but it had lost its power to intimidate. She had proven herself. And yet, the next step, the true crucible, was still to come. Jensen's voice broke the murmurs, commanding attention. "Tours, this was more than a test of skill. It was a demonstration of readiness. Tomorrow you will face your first real operational assignment. The scenario will be unpredictable. Lives will be on the line. Enemy forces will not be simulations. Are you prepared?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Yes, sir," she replied. Her voice carried the weight of years spent in preparation, the quiet defiance of a mechanic-turned-pilot, and the unshakable certainty that she belonged in the cockpit. Jensen studied her for a long, measured moment. "Good, because the Navy doesn't have room for hesitation. One wrong move and the consequences are permanent." She nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. This was not a simulation. This was not the controlled chaos of training. This was the real world, hostile, unpredictable, and unforgiving. Every ounce of knowledge, every instinct, every skill she had honed would be tested beyond limits she had yet to imagine. As Sarah climbed down from the simulator platform, a mix of awe, fear, and determination surged through her. She had earned recognition from the most formidable authority in the Navy, but the true judgment awaited in the sky, where her skills would meet reality, and lives would hang in the balance. Her communicator buzzed. A new mission assignment had been uploaded, coordinates encrypted, details classified. The first operational deployment was imminent. The thrill, the terror, the responsibility, it all converged into a single, electric moment. She touched the Apache's fuselage, feeling its heartbeat resonate with her own. The Admiral's test was complete. The real test had only just begun. The night was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and fills your chest with tension. Sarah Torres stood on the tarmac, staring at the Apache before her. Its rotor blades glinted faintly under the floodlights, spinning slowly, humming with barely contained power. Everything about it felt alive. The vibration under her fingertips, the smell of hydraulic fluid mixed with ozone, the way the machine seemed to anticipate her movements. Tonight, this was no simulation. Tonight, she was stepping into the unknown. Lives depended on her skill, and failure was not an option. The briefing had been terse, precise, and urgent. A hostile insurgent group had seized control of a remote village, taking civilians hostage. Intelligence suggested multiple armed combatants, unpredictable terrain, and improvised explosives scattered throughout the area. Her mission: provide air support, neutralize threats, and extract civilians with minimal casualties. Unlike the simulations, this was real. There was no rewind button, no reset. Every decision would be final, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her chest. Sarah's hands were steady as she climbed into the cockpit, strapping herself in. She ran through every system check, mentally reviewing every procedure, every contingency. Years of being dismissed as just a mechanic had honed her instincts to a razor's edge. She wasn't just prepared, she was hyper-aware, attuned to every vibration, every hum, every subtle shift in the Apache's behavior. The machine and she were symbiotic now, extensions of each other. The engines roared to life, a deep, powerful sound that reverberated through the tarmac and into her bones. She lifted off, the wind buffeting the helicopter as the night air swallowed her. Below, the landscape stretched out in shadows, rolling hills, dense forests, and the faint flicker of fires from the village. She switched to infrared, scanning for movement, noting heat signatures of both civilians and hostiles. Every signal was a potential threat or a potential life to save. Every second counted. Her heart raced, but fear had no grip on her. She had faced simulations that pushed the limits of skill, and now the stakes were infinitely higher. The Apache shuddered as she banked sharply to avoid a tree line, the rotor blades slicing through branches that snapped like brittle bones. Every maneuver required precision. Every miscalculation could mean disaster. She thought of Admiral Jensen's words, "Instinct alone isn't enough. Lives depend on every choice." Suddenly, flashes of gunfire erupted below. The insurgents had spotted her, and automatic weapons spat fire into the night. Sarah's hands flew across the controls, tilting, banking, and diving to avoid enemy fire. The Apache responded with lethal precision, weapon systems locking onto hostile positions. She hesitated for only a fraction of a second, recalling the civilians' locations, ensuring none were caught in the crossfire. One wrong shot, and she would be responsible for innocent lives. A flare lit up the night sky, illuminating a narrow pathway between the village's buildings. Civilians were trapped, screaming, huddled against crumbling walls. Sarah's mind raced. The route was narrow, the terrain uneven, and enemy fire relentless. Yet she had no choice. She pushed forward, hovering over the narrow passage, lowering the extraction rope with steady hands. One by one, villagers began to ascend, their terrified faces illuminated by the Apache's searchlights. Then came an explosion, A secondary device detonated near the village center, sending debris into the air and shaking the helicopter violently. Warning alarms blared. The rotors shuddered under the sudden stress. Her pulse spiked, adrenaline surging like wildfire. Every instinct, every ounce of training, every second spent learning the Apache's behavior came to the forefront. She stabilized the aircraft, compensating for the shockwave, and continued the extraction. Panic threatened to rise in her chest, but she forced focus, keeping the helicopter steady, keeping the civilians safe. The insurgents regrouped, attempting to flank her from a different angle. She had to anticipate every move, every possibility. The night sky became a chaotic chessboard, each decision critical, each maneuver a matter of life and death. The Apache groaned under the strain, systems flashing warnings. Her hands moved with precision, deploying countermeasures, evading fire, and positioning the aircraft to provide cover for the escaping civilians. She could hear the rapid breathing of the villagers over comms, their gratitude, their fear. Every life saved intensified her resolve. Minutes, or what felt like hours, passed in a blur of maneuvering, evasive action, and extraction. Sarah guided the last of the civilians into safety, flying low to avoid sniper fire while keeping the helicopter stable. She could feel the sweat dripping down her back, her muscles burning, yet her mind remained razor-sharp. This was no longer training. This was reality. The difference between success and failure was measured in heartbeats and inches. Finally, as the last civilian reached the extraction point, she banked sharply, ascending out of the village perimeter. The insurgents' fire continued, but the civilians were safe. She exhaled, though only briefly, as there was no time for relief. Mission success was measured not in seconds of rest, but in the continued survival of those under her protection. She had completed the operation, but the adrenaline and tension left her senses alive, hyper-aware of every vibration, every noise, every shadow. Back at base, the Apache's rotors slowed and she brought the aircraft to a smooth landing. Ground crew rushed to assist, but Sarah didn't move immediately. She sat in the cockpit, heart still racing, mind replaying every maneuver, every split-second decision. The village below was saved. Civilians were alive. Her skill had been tested and she had prevailed. And yet the weight of responsibility lingered, heavier than the exhaustion in her muscles. The comm crackled. Admiral Jensen's voice came through, calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "Tours, report to debriefing immediately." Sarah climbed out, her body trembling from adrenaline but her mind focused. She knew the debriefing would be critical, analysis of every decision, every movement, every calculation. It would be the moment that defined her career, the moment where she would be recognized or criticized, celebrated or questioned. Her hands still gripped the Apache's frame as she walked toward the operations center, each step echoing with the weight of everything she had accomplished and everything that was still at stake. Inside the debriefing room, screens displayed the operation from multiple angles. Every maneuver was scrutinized. Her evasive action, the precision of her hover, the timing of the civilian extractions. Pilots who had once doubted her watched in silence, unable to fully grasp what they had just witnessed. Some shifted uncomfortably, others leaned forward, clearly impressed yet unwilling to speak aloud. Jensen's gaze fixed on her, piercing and unyielding. "Tours," he began, voice deliberate, "you have done what few pilots could even attempt. You executed maneuvers under pressure that would have broken others. You saved lives. Civilians are alive because of you. And yet, this is only the beginning. Your instincts are extraordinary, but they will be tested again, in circumstances that will be even more complex, unpredictable, and dangerous." Sarah nodded, absorbing the weight of his words. She had crossed a threshold tonight. She had proven herself not just a mechanic or a trainee, but a pilot capable of extraordinary feats. But the Navy had a long memory, and missions would only grow more difficult. Every decision she made would ripple through the lives of those she protected and the forces she commanded. As she left the debriefing, the tension of the night still thrummed through her veins. Exhaustion pressed against her body, but her mind was alight with awareness. She had faced the impossible, and the impossible had bent beneath her skill. For the first time, she felt the weight of recognition, not the tentative admiration of simulators, but the acknowledgement that her instincts and courage had real consequences in the real world. Yet the scorn of doubters still lingered, a shadow she could not ignore. Pilots whispered behind her back, some envious, some skeptical. "She got lucky," one muttered. "Let's see how she does in a multi-day operation." Another scoffed, voice low. "She's good for a one-off, but sustained missions will break her." Sarah felt the old familiar sting, but this time it did not weaken her. She had flown through fire, navigated chaos, and saved lives. She had earned her place in the sky. The doubts of others no longer dictated her worth. Her instinct, skill, and courage had proven themselves. The Apache awaited her, silent and powerful in the hangar, a loyal companion ready for the next test. The night sky beyond shimmered with stars, hinting at both challenges and opportunity. She touched the helicopter's fuselage lightly, drawing strength from its presence. Every mission, every operation, every challenge would push her further, but she had crossed the threshold. She was no longer just a mechanic. She was a pilot. And the sky had finally taken notice. The sun hadn't yet risen, but the tarmac was already alive with activity. Helicopters roared to life, engines cutting through the crisp morning air, a symphony of mechanical power and precision. Sarah Torres tightened her harness in the Apache, her hands running over the familiar controls, feeling the hum of the aircraft beneath her fingers. The last mission had tested her instincts, but this was something different. The intel was incomplete, the terrain unpredictable, and the hostiles far more aggressive than anything simulated. Lives hung in the balance, and failure wasn't an option. The call came through the secure comms. A convoy of civilians had been ambushed in a mountainous pass, cut off from extraction by both enemy fire and treacherous terrain. Reports indicated multiple injuries, improvised traps, and insurgents surrounding the area. The mission was labeled high risk in every report, with a success probability lower than any operational standard. Sarah didn't flinch. She had faced impossible odds before. This was just another test, albeit one where the stakes were life and death. The Apache lifted into the morning fog, rotors slicing the mist with a rhythmic hum. The mountains rose like jagged teeth beneath her, cliffs and narrow passes narrowing with every second. Enemy fire erupted almost immediately, tracers cutting through the fog, bullets pinging off the rotors. Sarah banked sharply, weaving through the narrow corridor of rocks, her fingers precise, her instincts razor-sharp. She could feel the helicopter respond to her touch, every vibration a signal, every sound a cue. Below, the convoy was pinned. Vehicles were overturned, flames licking their sides, civilians huddled for protection. The insurgents had prepared an ambush designed to trap anyone attempting rescue. The Apache hovered, a powerful predator poised over a battlefield. Sarah assessed, calculated, and acted. She deployed countermeasures, flares illuminating the mountainside, and descended into the valley, careful to avoid mines and debris. Every movement had to be perfect. A single miscalculation would cost lives. Her voice came over the comm, calm but authoritative. "Civilians, remain calm. We're getting you out. Trust me and stay low." Panic rippled through the trapped group, but the steady hum of the Apache above brought focus. Sarah could feel their fear, their hope, and their dependence. This wasn't just a mission. It was a responsibility that pressed against her chest, a weight heavier than any mechanical failure or simulator she had faced. Enemy fire intensified. The insurgents had flanked the convoy, taking strategic positions on cliffs and behind boulders. The Apache shuddered as bullets struck near the tail rotor, warnings flaring on the control panel. Sarah's pulse remained steady. She maneuvered the helicopter with surgical precision, twisting and banking to provide cover while keeping the extraction zone accessible. Every movement was calculated, instinct-driven, and precise. She lowered ropes for extraction, timing each descent with deadly accuracy. The first civilian reached the rope, ascending shakily into the Apache. Another followed, and another. Her eyes scanned constantly for threats, her mind a machine of calculation and focus. The insurgents fired relentlessly, but she anticipated each attack, countering with evasive maneuvers and suppressive fire from the Apache's mounted systems. The mountain air was alive with danger, yet Sarah moved with a fluidity that seemed almost impossible. She had become one with the helicopter, instinct fused with skill, experience, and courage. Then the unexpected. A landslide triggered by the insurgents' explosives sent boulders crashing down near the convoy. Dust and debris filled the air, reducing visibility to near zero. Alarms blared in the cockpit, sensors warning of rotor stress and altitude instability. Sarah's heart leapt, but fear didn't dictate her actions. She tilted the rotors, banking sharply, feeling the aircraft respond as though it were an extension of her body. Civilians scrambled for cover, and she adjusted the descent, timing the rope's deployment with millimeter precision. The evacuation became a deadly ballet. Enemy fire, falling debris, and narrow mountain corridors tested every skill she had honed. She kept the helicopter steady, focusing on the civilians, adjusting for every shift in weight and turbulence. The Apache groaned under strain, but she coaxed it through the chaos, anticipating reactions before they occurred. One by one, civilians ascended into the helicopter, their terrified faces illuminated by searchlights cutting through dust and smoke. A sudden explosion rocked the mountainside, sending a massive boulder hurtling toward the Apache. Sarah reacted instantly, diving the helicopter, twisting it to avoid catastrophe by mere inches. The rotor blades clipped rock, sparks flying, but the helicopter held. Her pulse raced, her muscles screamed, but her mind was a razor-sharp blade of focus. She stabilized the aircraft and continued the extraction, refusing to let fear compromise her responsibility. The last civilian approached the rope, wounded and panicked. Sarah lowered the Apache as close as safely possible, extending every ounce of patience and control. The insurgents were relentless, moving to cut off escape routes, and the terrain offered no margin for error. Sarah's instincts guided her hands, every movement deliberate, every adjustment precise. The civilian ascended, trembling, into the safety of the helicopter. She reached down, grabbing them securely, and pulled them aboard. As the last civilian was secured, Sarah banked sharply, ascending from the pass while avoiding both enemy fire and falling debris. The Apache's systems groaned under the strain, lights flashing warnings. Sweat dripped into her eyes, stinging, but she didn't falter. She had navigated through chaos, danger, and near-impossible odds, and succeeded. Below, the convoy was safe, and the insurgents were forced to retreat, thwarted by a pilot who refused to yield. The helicopter touched down at a secure zone, and ground personnel rushed to assist the civilians. Sarah climbed down, hands trembling from exhaustion, sweat-soaked uniform clinging to her skin. She looked at the group, their eyes wide with awe and gratitude. Some whispered her name, others simply stared, unable to comprehend how a single pilot had defied impossible odds. For the first time, she realized the full impact of her actions. She had saved lives. She had proven, beyond any doubt, that skill, courage, and instinct could defy even the most harrowing scenarios. Admiral Jensen appeared, walking toward her with a deliberate, measured pace. His eyes were sharp, but the slightest trace of pride softened his stern expression. "Mechanic Tours," he said, voice calm but intense, "you've done something few could even imagine. You saved lives tonight, real lives, not simulations. Your instincts, your skill, your courage, extraordinary. You have proven yourself beyond any doubt." Sarah allowed herself a brief exhale, but her mind remained alert. The mission had been a success, but the adrenaline and stakes left her senses alive, aware that danger could always return. She had crossed a threshold, transforming from mechanic to pilot, from trainee to a force capable of saving lives under impossible conditions. The other pilots watched silently, some with admiration, some with envy, all forced to acknowledge her skill. The whispers of doubt that had haunted her career seemed to fade, replaced by a grudging respect. Yet she knew better than to assume the war was over. Every mission, every challenge, every life saved would only increase the demands on her skill, endurance, and resolve. Jensen placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture firm but rare. Tonight, you became more than a pilot. You became a symbol, not just for what you can do, but for what's possible when talent meets determination. Remember this. The sky will test you again, and next time it will push even harder. Sarah nodded, absorbing the gravity of his words. She had faced the impossible and prevailed, but she understood that each victory was merely the prelude to the next challenge. Her instincts, courage, and skill would be tested again, in ways she could not yet imagine. As she looked at the Apache, now resting in the quiet hangar, she felt a deep connection. A machine, a partner, a lifeline. The sky had acknowledged her skill, the civilians had depended on her courage, and the Navy had begun to see what she had always known, that she was more than just a mechanic. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a flicker of doubt lingered, a reminder that the real challenges were never truly over. The sky would always demand more. The next impossible mission was only a heartbeat away. Sarah Torres climbed down from the Apache, her uniform streaked with grime and sweat, her hands raw but steady. The night had tested her, pushed her, and forced her to rise above fear, chaos, and impossible odds. She had succeeded. She had saved lives. And the impossible was just the beginning. The morning sun broke over the horizon, casting golden light across the tarmac. Helicopters hummed softly, engines idling, but for Sarah Torres, the world felt suspended in a fragile moment between exhaustion and triumph. Her last mission had tested her in ways no simulator could, proving beyond doubt that she was more than just a mechanic. She had saved lives under impossible odds, maneuvered through chaos, and emerged victorious. Yet the question lingered. How would the Navy, and those who had doubted her for years, recognize her achievement? The hangar was unusually quiet, the air thick with anticipation. Pilots moved with practiced precision, but their eyes betrayed curiosity and caution. Many had witnessed her feats, the simulations, the real missions, but no one could deny the tension surrounding her ascent. A mechanic had not only flown missions but had excelled in situations that could have shattered the best-trained pilots. The whispers of disbelief and envy still floated through the air, but a new respect mingled with them, a recognition of skill that could no longer be ignored. Her communicator buzzed, and the familiar calm voice of Admiral Jensen filled her ear. "Torres, report to my office immediately. Don't delay." Sarah's pulse quickened, though not with fear. She was ready. She had been tested, scrutinized, and proven herself in fire and blood. She walked toward the Admiral's office, her boots echoing on the steel floor. Each step carried years of doubt, mockery, and determination, all culminating in this moment. She knew what awaited her behind that door would define her career, and perhaps her place in history. Admiral Jensen's office was a commanding presence, lined with maps, digital monitors, and tactical projections. He didn't rise as she entered. Instead, he gestured for her to sit, eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Torres," he began, his voice steady, "I've watched hundreds of pilots, assessed thousands of maneuvers, and scrutinized countless decisions. I've seen instinct, skill, courage, but rarely all in one individual, combined with the clarity of thought and decisiveness that you possess." Sarah swallowed, sitting tall, hands clasped. Every fiber of her being was alert, every instinct sharpened. She had faced simulations, ambushes, and impossible rescues, but the weight of recognition was something new, heavy, and electrifying. Jensen's gaze softened slightly, but the authority remained unbroken. "You have done something extraordinary," he continued. "In a matter of weeks, you have transformed from a mechanic, doubted and overlooked, into a pilot who has executed missions beyond what many would dare attempt. You have saved civilians, demonstrated unparalleled skill, and shown the courage that inspires those around you." Sarah felt a swell of emotion, tempered by focus. Tears threatened, but she held them back, letting the weight of his words sink in. She had fought her entire career to be seen, to be recognized, and now, finally, her skill and courage were acknowledged at the highest level. Jensen leaned forward, the tone of his voice shifting, carrying both gravity and honor. Effective immediately, Sarah Torres, you are being officially recognized as a fully operational Apache pilot. Your title is no longer an echo of doubt, no longer just a mechanic. You are the first in this program to demonstrate this level of proficiency under live operational conditions. The words hit her like a tidal wave. Recognition at last. After years of mockery, skepticism, and scorn, she had earned her place not just in the cockpit but in the respect of the Navy itself. Her pulse raced, and for a brief moment, the weight of every insult, every overlooked hour, every whispered doubt dissolved into triumph. But Jensen wasn't finished. He reached for a secure folder and handed it to her. "And there's more," he said. "The Navy has been observing your missions closely. Your courage, skill, and composure under extreme stress have set a new standard. I'm calling in a special commendation, a recognition rarely given, reserved for pilots whose actions redefine operational excellence. You've earned it, Torres. No one can take this from you." Sarah's hands shook as she accepted the folder, eyes wide. She opened it briefly and glimpsed the language: commendation for bravery, operational skill, and life-saving heroism. It was official, indelible, a permanent testament to everything she had fought to achieve. She realized finally that her journey from mocked mechanic to revered pilot was complete, or at least this chapter was. Before she could speak, Jensen leaned back, voice quiet but deliberate. "There's one more thing. Your call sign, officially assigned now, is Valkyrie. It reflects both your skill in the air and your ability to protect lives in impossible conditions. From now on, that's how you will be known in the fleet." Sarah allowed herself a small, private smile. Valkyrie, strong, fearless, and unstoppable, the very essence of who she had become. The name carried weight, a declaration to the skis, to the Navy, and to every doubter that she had arrived. Outside the office, the hangar personnel had gathered quietly, having overheard some of the comms. The whispers of disbelief were gone, replaced by awe and muted applause. Pilots who had once doubted her approached cautiously, offering handshakes and nods of respect. Some muttered apologies, others simply stared, unable to reconcile their previous assumptions with the undeniable truth of her skill. Sarah nodded, acknowledging them with grace. She didn't need approval. They had witnessed her feats firsthand. Recognition was hers. As she walked back to the Apache, the morning sun glinting off the rotors, she felt the culmination of years of struggle, doubt, and relentless determination. Every hour in the hangar, every ignored remark, every sneer of disbelief, it had led to this moment. She had claimed her place, not just in the cockpit but in the history of those who dared to challenge expectations and rise above them. The radio crackled. Jensen's voice, calm and precise, issued her first official operational order. "Valkyrie, mission coordinates encrypted. Prepare for deployment. Your skills are needed immediately." Sarah Torres climbed into the Apache once more, hands on the controls, the machine humming beneath her like a living creature. She felt a surge of purpose, a connection between human and machine, between instinct and reality. The sky awaited, limitless and unforgiving, and she was ready. As the rotors lifted, carrying her into the expanse of blue, Sarah looked down at the hangar one last time. The faces of those who doubted her were there, watching in awe. Some still whispered, perhaps out of disbelief. Others silently acknowledged that history had just shifted, that a mechanic, once mocked, overlooked, underestimated, had soared to heights no one had imagined. Above, the clouds beckoned, the wind carrying the hum of possibility and danger. Sarah tightened her grip on the controls, eyes narrowed, heart steady. She was Valkyrie now, pilot, hero, and symbol of courage under pressure. The missions would continue, the challenges would grow, and the skis would always test her. But she had crossed the threshold, leaving doubt behind, and every second from here on would be her proving ground. She felt the adrenaline surge once more, tempered by mastery and focus. Every life she would protect, every mission she would undertake, every impossible challenge she would face, she would meet with skill, courage, and determination. The mockery, the doubt, the whispers of just a mechanic, they no longer mattered. She had earned her place and nothing could take it from her. As the Apache ascended, cutting through the clouds and into the morning light, Sarah Torres, Valkyrie, looked to the horizon. The sky stretched endlessly before her, a battlefield, a challenge, a canvas for her courage. And somewhere far above the earth, Admiral Jensen's voice echoed in her memory. The sky will test you again, and next time it will push even harder. She smiled, tightening her grip on the controls, feeling alive, powerful, and unstoppable. Let it come, she thought. I am ready. And with that, Valkyrie disappeared into the clouds, a force forged from grit, skill, and relentless determination, destined to soar far beyond the limits anyone had imagined.